Today's art talk is on Pierre-Auguste Renoir. My name is Kathy Locke. I am a San Francisco-based figurative painter, graduate professor at the Academy of Art University, and editor-in-chief of musingsonart.org. Renoir's work is all about pleasure. Because of this, he has been nicknamed the painter of happiness. He had a keen eye for capturing the movement of light and shadow, which he applied with staccato brushstrokes and playful flecks of vibrant color. It is not only his application of paint, but the human element in his work that sets him apart. As the son of a tailor and a seamstress, Renoir naturally developed an eye for fashion. This is why we see so many well-dressed Parisians in his paintings. As well, Renoir's work reflects the feeling of intimate domesticity of middle-class life, all of which came from his upbringing. As a teenager, Renoir worked in the porcelain factories near his home as a decorative painter. It was only natural that his early influences as a painter were Rococo masters such as Jean-Antoine Watteau and Francois Boucher. These painters' soft, loose handling of paint with individual brushstrokes really influenced Renoir's work. In 1862, Renoir began his formal training in Paris under the Swiss-born academic painter Charles Gleyre. Gleyre became an influential teacher and was able to take over the atelier of Paul Delaroche in 1843. Also studying with Gleyre were Alfred Sisley, Jean-Frédéric Bazille, and Claude Monet. Gleyre did not charge his students a fee, but expected them to pay for the rent and the models. In 1866, Renoir joined the Babazon painters and began plein air painting in the forest of Fontainebleau. This became a favorite painting spot for Renoir, and thanks to his friends Jules Lecour, who owned a house in the area, Renoir was able to visit frequently. By the end of the 1860s, Renoir was ready to move beyond the restrained atelier environment and began painting shoulder to shoulder with Monet. Renoir painted a number of genre scenes of Parisians enjoying the countryside, such as bathing on the Seine and the Frog Pond. In these early paintings, we see the influence of Watteau's playful quality of Rococo art combined with Renoir's pure joy of painting. There is no feeling of Renoir's challenging financial life during this time in this work. At this very early period in Renoir's career, he had already found his voice as a painter through these paintings of bustling Parisian leisure. Okay, let's start talking briefly about color. In 1855, a French scientist named Michael Chevreul designed a color wheel divided into 72 parts. And this was the color wheel that the Impressionist painters used. In addition to the three primaries on this color wheel of red, yellow, and blue, this wheel depicts three secondary mixtures of orange, green, and violet, as well as 6 further secondary mixtures. These sectors are each divided into 5 zones, and all radii were separated into 20 segments to accommodate the different brightnesses. Chevreul's chromatic diagram greatly facilitated the study of complementary colors, which are 2 colors situated opposite from each other on the wheel. The Impressionists used Chevreul's color wheel to construct their paintings. Now let's look at Renoir's painting Dance at Moulin de la Galette using Chevreul's color wheel. Here we go. Now note that about 70% of the entire painting is composed in cool colors, blues and greens. If we look closer, we will see that the dark blues are really dark violet. If we take the very first color that becomes violet on the wheel as we go around, right around here, and we go all the way around to the colors stop having any blue in them at all, to this red, and we'll find all of these colors in this painting. If we take the strongest violet color right here, and we go directly across from it to this yellow-green color, we'll find that in the hats worn by the gentlemen, and I think there's a few ladies' hats there too. And then if we go to the warmest red color right here, and we go across, we find blue-green. And if you take tints of that blue-green, you're going to find them all back in here. So that's a little bit of an idea of how the Impressionist painters used this color wheel. Now let's talk about Renoir's technique a little bit. Here we have one of his most famous paintings, Dance at the Moulin de la Galette. This was exhibited at the Third Impressionist exhibition, and it is considered one of his more mature works. Renoir paints a merry scene of a crowded dance floor and an open door space, Renoir's trademark display of Parisian fashion. The painting is primarily a dark blue-violet, which is created with ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. We see flecks of red and yellow dancing throughout the piece. I've always felt that the use of ultramarine blue was one of Renoir's trademarks. Oil paint had just recently come out in porcelain tubes, and manufacturers were giving out ultramarine blue for free. So that's part of why we see so much of that in Renoir's work. Let's talk about the structure of this painting. There's very little architectural structure in this painting. We see, a bench on a diagonal here in the foreground. We see a few architectural elements in the background, but other than that, this painting is really created through the use of what we call atmospheric perspective. I've created a black and white photo of this painting just so we can analyze the values and structure. Here in the foreground, I've outlined it in red. We see a group to the right in this red area where there's very little value contrast. In this front center area, we see the most value contrast between this chair against this black area and the woman with the striped dress. Also against a dark value of this woman behind her. Once we isolate this foreground area, we see a horizontal line that's created by the tops of all the heads of the people, and it becomes very obvious. In this area I have outlined in blue. We see that there's very little value contrast back in here, and it really helps to make this area just fade into the background. And so now all of a sudden we start to see the area that Renoir has meant to be the focal point, which is this group of three couples. This first one, our eye is led into the painting by this diagonal of the woman's body to couple number 1, which leads us to couple number 2, and that leads us to couple number 3. Now let's return to the color version. Do you see it in a new light? 80% of this painting is versions of blue-violet. Next we see yellow in the hats, which is repeated on the floor, this yellow color, where Renoir has mixed blue-violet and yellow together to create a muted yellow. Remember that violet and yellow are complementary colors. Finally, red has been used playfully in a very sparingly way throughout the painting. If we look at all of these outdoor scenes that Renoir has created during this period, starting with Bathing on the Seine in 1869, we see that they're all structured using atmospheric perspective. There's very little architectural perspective in these paintings, particularly this one in the garden. Okay, let's start talking about the luncheon of the boating party. This is a very different painting. It was exhibited at the 7th Impressionist exhibition in 1882, and it's considered one of the best paintings of his, and the critics considered it the best painting in the show. It was purchased from the artist by the art dealer Paul Renoir, who later, his son, sold it in 1923 to the industrialist Duncan Phillips, who bought it for $125,000. It is now part of the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C. This depicts a group of Renoir's friends relaxing, and Renoir always used his friends in his paintings. So let's look at who's here. Right here in the foreground, we have his future wife and a model that he used for years, Aline Charicot. And then along the railing here, we have the owner of this restaurant's two children, Alphonse Fournaise and Louise Alphonse Fournaise, back here. We have the actress Angélie Legat up here in this area, the Italian journalist Adrian Maggiolo right here, and we have the actress back here, Jean Summery, who had been his lover in the late 1870s. And then, last but not least, is a very important figure down here is Gustave Caillebotte, who was an art patron, a painter, and a very important member of the Impressionist circle. In the early 1880s, Renoir felt his work needed more structure, and he wanted to incorporate more traditional techniques to his work. He started to explore Renaissance and Baroque painting. Renoir was the first Impressionist painter to perceive the potential limitations of an art based primarily on optical sensations and light effects, which is what we were talking about when we analyzed the last painting, where he was just using atmospheric perspective techniques to build his paintings. He recognized the necessity of composition and the underlying structure of a painting. In 1881, Renoir began traveling. His first voyage was to Italy so that he could study the works of Renaissance masters. He later went to Algeria to follow the footsteps of Eugene Delacroix. It was in Algeria that he encountered a serious bout with pneumonia, leaving him bedridden for 6 weeks and permanently damaging his respiratory system. While in Sicily in 1882, Renoir met composer Richard Wagner and painted his portrait in 30 minutes. So here with this painting, Luncheon on the Boating Party, I've made it black and white so we can look at the structure. This very front table is very important, and we can see as far as even contrast goes, we've got the Aline here in black basically against the white, creating our greatest possible contrast. So if we look at the structural lines of this table, it creates a vanishing lines that lead us up to the tie of this man here. So that helps us to determine what is our horizon line in this painting, which is represented by this green line. We now see that the vanishing lines of the rail over here lead to that horizon line. There's a lot more structure that we've seen in this painting than we've seen in his other work up into this period. Again, he's still using a lot of value contrast in his work, but this piece relies on much stronger architectural structure than we've seen in the past. Portraiture was very important to Renoir, and he attached so much importance to it that during the second Impressionist exhibition of April 1876, he did not include any landscapes amongst the 15 works that he exhibited, and of them, 10 were commissioned portraits. This painting of the Sicilies, 1868, was painted when Renoir was 28 years old. It is a painting of Alfred and Eugenia Sicily in their garden. Renoir asked his friends, the Sicilies, to model for him because he could not afford models. And this painting is styled after Manet's work with this, because you can see the use of the smoother edges that Manet was using during that time period, as well as a lot of the same kinds of coloring You see a lot more blending in this painting than you see in his later work, in Renoir's later work. This stunning portrait of Rafa Maitri, 1871. It's a very formal portrait and one of his earliest commissioned portraits. This painting helped establish him in the front rank of the Parisian avant-garde portrait painters. Few of his other commissioned work display the same level of richness in rendering the sitter's costume and setting. The woman in this painting, his name is Camille, and she was also known as Rafa. She was the mistress of Louis Edmond Matra for over 30 years, and he was the son of a prosperous lawyer in Bordeaux. His circle of friends included artists like Renoir. Little is known of his mistress Rafa, a girl of Belgian origin, whom he met as a student and who remained his companion until his death. Here in this painting, she is dressed in the latest fashion. After his death, all she got from his estate were the 2 paintings that Renoir did of her. This particular painting she sold the same year as Matra's death to Durand Ruel. Here is another painting that is very similar, done a year later, of Camille Monet reading. We can see the same lavish, ornate style to the clothing and the furniture, and here we see the lovely way in which Renoir uses color to unite the painting. This is perhaps his most important portrait because it really established him on the map. This is Madame Charpentier and her children. Renoir gave expression to the poetry of an elegant home and the beautiful dresses of the time. We see the Japanese-style living room of her Parisian townhouse. Marguerite Charpentier sits beside her son Paul, age 3, who is dressed identical to his sister Georgette, who is perched by the family dog. Marguerite was a well-connected publisher's wife who hosted elite literary salons used her influence to ensure that this painting enjoyed a choice spot at the salon in 1879. This painting was commissioned by French doctor Etienne Goujon, and he commissioned Renoir to paint 4 of his children. This is his 5-year-old son, who has the same name as his father, and he's dressed in a very feminine style, which was usual for boys of that period. This represents the 1880s. Was a time when Renoir was returning to a more classical style. He was influenced by French neoclassical artist Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres for this painting, and we see a real porcelain type modeling of the skin, and there's a contrast between the precise lines on the child's face and the freely applied brushwork in the rest of the painting. This is a lovely, very small painting at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. It's Jeanne Semaret, who was an actress and Renoir's lover between 1877 and 1880. This first painting that he did was a very casual style. It's a typical impressionistic style where we see the bright, pure colored, very vibrant pink background. It's very interesting the way he's captured her personality. If you cover the right side of her face, you'll see that her face looks very sad. If you cover the left side of her face, you'll see that she looks very happy. This painting was done in one sitting, and it really reflects the speed of the brushwork and energy. This painting is the second more formal portrait of the actress, and he's painted it to represent the entrance into a theater. It was intended to be more formal so that it could be shown at the salon, and it did very well when it was shown at the French salon. The execution has nothing to do with the way that French academia was painting during that time period, but nonetheless it did very well. It really reflects the vibrant texture and the finest color reflections that we see in the mature work of Impressionism. So Renoir is also very well known for his nudes. This beautiful piece, which has several names, Nude, the Beautiful Anna is one of the names. It's a very famous painting and became famous because of the color of the skin. And this color of the skin picks up all the colors in the environment that she's in. And you can really see this painting well in person. You can see the colors that I'm talking about. This painting is at the Pushkin in Moscow. This painting was also called the Pearl because of her translucent skin. When it first was exhibited, it caused quite a scandal. And then in 1898, Peter Shishkin, a very wealthy Russian businessman, purchased the painting. It was never, at that point, was not intended for public display. So this painting was thrown into a bargain with his purchase of a Japanese screen. And Peter Shishkin was a bachelor, single man. He lived in his private apartment, and only a few people knew about the existence of this painting, which he kept in his study. And after dinner, he would invite his gentleman friends up to his study, and he had the painting covered with a velvet cloth, and he would roll back the curtain, and he would reveal this beautiful nude. And he said that he asked those who viewed it to forgive the weakness of an old bachelor. It's another gorgeous nude by Renoir. This piece, The Large Bathers, this painting depicts a scene of nude women bathing. The figures have a real sculptural quality, which is something that he developed in his more mature work. The landscape still maintains that real shimmering quality of impressionistic light that he developed so well. With this new style, Renoir's intention was to reconcile the modern forms of painting with the painting traditions of the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly those of Ingres and Raphael. Renoir tried to find a compromise between the styles of these old masters with the new impressionistic style. Another gorgeous painting. This was influenced by the French Rococo painter Boucher. He felt that Renoir felt that Boucher was one of the painters who best understood the female body. In this painting, Renoir is celebrating the glory and the roundness of the female form. It's just the beginning of him moving into his later sculpturous and monumental style. And this painting represents his later work, 1990, and we can see a real shift in color palette. Around 1892, Renoir developed rheumatoid arthritis, and by 1907, he was forced to move to a warmer climate close to the Mediterranean coast. And Renoir painted during the last 20 years of his life, even with arthritis severely limiting his movement, forcing him into a wheelchair. He developed progressive deformities of the hand and right shoulder, requiring him to adapt his painting technique. Now, I put this painting in just to show you a real shift in his style. This is 1880, gorgeous floral at the Hermitage Museum in Russia. And then this painting, 1910, 1917, also at the Hermitage, really shows the effect of this rheumatoid arthritis on his painting style. Before his death in 1919, Renoir traveled to the Louvre to see his paintings hanging in the museum alongside the masterpieces of the great masters. He was a very prolific artist, creating several thousand artworks in his lifetime, and includes some of the most well-known paintings in the world. So if you enjoyed this lecture, I invite you to join me on one of my art tours in Russia, where we will see many paintings I've shown you today. This includes several days of lectures, touring the Hermitage and other great museums in Russia. I also invite you to check out my blog for more lectures and images. Prints of Renoir's work is available there. So at musingsonart.org.